My name is Jane Prusakova. I'm from United States. I work at Viasat as of recently. Uh, I'm a developer. Giving people time to settle down. How many people do I have here who are technically inclined? That's engineers, QA, or DevOps. Great. Any managers? Almost the same folks. So I don't know how you manage two jobs, but let's assume you do. And regardless if you're a developer or a manager, you must care about this stuff, right? And that's what we get if we do code reviews well. Not just code reviews. Having code reviews is good, but doing them well, we get to share knowledge, we get to find problems. More importantly, at least for me, we get to go on vacation. Anyone get calls while you're on vacation? Do you have to turn off your phone not to get those calls? Personally, last year I spent 2 hours in Disney World talking my team through a crisis, an unpredictable crisis. Most of that was, don't worry, you got it. They did get it. It was fine. But there I was, standing in the middle of Disney World with my family. Well, my family was running around, trying to talk through some database issues. Code reviews. We did more of that after. By the way, I don't have Q&A section at the end, so please raise hands, please speak up. Q&A starts now. Code reviews are scary. I don't know what your experience is. Mine has been that we don't want to do code reviews because if we do them on Tuesday, that's a day I need to prepare for mentally and emotionally all week for, and then I need the rest of the week to relax after and maybe pound on other people in their code reviews to make myself feel better. That's a terrible mood to be in for 40 plus hours a week, or maybe 70 plus hours a week, depending on how much you work, what kind of company you are with. That's scary. People get to tell you what's wrong with your work. If you're a developer, like most people I know, well, not most, many people I know, you cherish your code. You feel like it's your baby. You put your heart and soul into it. You really don't want someone who spent all of 10 minutes or maybe 10 hours on it to stomp all over it and then tell you how many ways you could have done it differently. Their way. Better. Not necessarily better, but better in their view. It's something to brace for. It's something we hate. It's something we tend to postpone. A bunch of places that absolutely, where management was sold on that idea that we absolutely must have code reviews, did them once a release. That's every 6 months. That's how much everybody hated them. People pushed them off until the last possible moment. This talk is about making it better. This talk is about maybe we don't have to dread it. Maybe we can do it twice a day and not feel scared and abused during and after. And maybe we can have a good time as a team. So, are we supposed to be judged as coders? Are we supposed to be judged by our code? Hell yes, right? We just had a talk about interviews, and at the interview, we ask you to send a code sample, and maybe they'll put you in front of a whiteboard, and maybe they'll want you to share your GitHub open source projects. We are definitely judged by our code. And when you push code into your team's repository, they may not be looking, but maybe they will. So in code reviews, the scariest thing that could happen is we'll look at it and say it's horrible. Is it? Is it scary for anybody else? It is scary. Not everybody admits to it. It's scary for almost everybody. I've met a few folks who are like, I'm the best, regardless of what you think. I still think they're bluffing. but most people will get visibly upset right there. The point there is you don't score any point by telling someone else how we are terrible. And it has to come from the leadership. I don't mean the CEO, although if CEO gets into your code review and starts praising people, that's a good thing. But it comes from you, all of us, stepping up, taking leadership, noticing the good stuff. It's about working together as a team. We all get points when we get things right. And code review is a great place to notice how we are doing things right. I'll talk about it more. Second thing, attention is respect. Hey, all these smart people are taking 20 minutes out of their day to look at the code I just wrote. That's flattering, isn't it? They're not just interested in the features because the product owner requested them. They're interested in how good a job I'm doing. That's nice. And finally, don't burden the most senior guy with all the reviews. It's always a guy, and they'll spend all their time pointing out other people's flaws. It does terrible things to his character. It does even worse things to the team culture. And your code doesn't get better because people have their ways. Some of them are better than others. No one is perfect. Not even that most senior guy who started the company 20 years ago and still flies on the same knowledge, because nobody has ever reviewed his code and pointed out issues with that. So this is a Venn diagram about what we know about code. Do you know how Venn diagrams work? Of course you do. The author wrote some code, and then there's other people on the team who know pretty much nothing about it yet. It might have been posted to repo or not, but we don't really know that much. It's a tick in the ticket bucket. Author doesn't know everything because, well, there is QA, but we'll find out some other things, maybe bugs, maybe undocumented features. If we decide to do a code review, reviewer must learn a little bit about that code. What this code is meant to accomplish, what it's not supposed to break, what does it touch, what does it use. So that's something, but nothing really happened yet. Just someone learned what we have to code review this later. We are looking to close that gap, but nobody knows about the code. And it will take us more than a code review, but code review will get us at least part of the way there. So after we've gotten through a review, reviewer has a very good sense of the code that's been reviewed. There are some conditions. It's not universally true. If you're doing 6 months worth of code and review in 2 weeks worth of meetings, you're probably in 2 weeks calendar time, you're probably not going to know that much. There is still a gap. We still could have mixed some bugs, and we probably have, because any complex system is going to have bugs. But there is a lot more knowledge about code, and more importantly, it's distributed over at least 2 people's heads. There's your buzz factor rising up to 2. You know what the buzz factor is. If you put your team on, how many people do you need to put on the same bus so that in case of an accident, your code base is completely unmaintainable? You can't figure it out. So what it gets you is joint code ownership. A reviewer is now knowledgeable of the code and responsible of the code we reviewed. Is this obvious? Does this sound easy? Why don't we do this more often? It's extra work. Yeah, it is extra work. It's okay. It pushes people to interact. If I'm working hard on delivering something. Okay, do we need to get out? If people are working hard on a particular feature, it's really hard to put this aside and focus on somebody else's work. It's hard to get away from your computer screen and to talk or to write to somebody. It's extra. It's not something we think of developers should be doing, but it is something that developers should be doing. And it results in better skills and product quality. So not only you get to go on vacation, your product works better. Kind of a win-win, but you do have to work extra for it, like diverse teams from the previous talk. Size matters, that's my favorite part. Let's have a code review. Let's block half a day and review last sprint's contributions from 5 people, or maybe 15 people. How long does it take an average developer to tune out? First time you're doing this, about 30 minutes. They'll be actively participating, then they'll start dozing off. If you're doing this regularly, by the third such a meeting, they're tuning off in the first 2 minutes. It's not sustainable. It's too hard. It took 5 very smart people in 2 weeks of intensive work to write this. What makes you think your folks will be able to have consistent focus on tiny details of the code in the span of half a day continuously? You have to have breaks. This complexity cannot be handled in big chunks. Yeah, but Twitter posted a joke, of course. Twitter is full of jokes, but it's all too real. If you bring just a little bit too much code at the same time, you don't get much use out of it. You don't get comprehensive coverage, of course, but also you get nothing useful. It looks fine. Small code reviews work very well with agile techniques. If you can do it 2 or 3 times a day, please do it. You'll be reviewing 20 lines of code at most. That's the best. That's something to strive for. Yes, you're going to notice tiny details about the code. Some of them good, some of them bad. But does wonders for code style. Teams synchronize by looking at other people's code. And it promotes knowledge sharing in tiny details. It's important. When something is broken, it's usually a tiny detail that will have you hunting for a bug for many days. It's not the big things. Code inspection started a long time ago. Michael Fagan invented this method, and he prescribed how to do it. If the chart on the bottom looks like waterfall, it's because it is. It came with a waterfall culture, and it fit. You're supposed to print the code. That starts to smell fishy already, right? And then you're supposed to explain it and defend it, because other people are there to attack it. They still do this sometimes. I still see companies that do this and then say, well, our developers are overworked and don't like each other very much. This is why. Fagan inspection started relatively soon after software programs stopped being mathematically verified and started being buggy. If you're verifying your code in a mathematical and logical way, bugs could not happen. It also takes forever to get anything done. So we said, okay, we'll deal with some mistakes, we'll reason about it to a point, and then we'll expect it to work well enough. Welcome to 21st century. Our code works well enough. Everything is buggy. And we need code reviews to find the issues that a lot of mechanical techniques will not find. So don't do this. Learn from this, but don't do this. Another issue with code reviews is, it'll take us a lot of time. it takes a whole sprint to review code over the last 6 months. Yeah, code review takes time, but it will take even more time with less return if you put too much stuff in it, if you expect too much to happen. So let's go through the list. This is more technical part of the talk. One thing that I recommend people start with, visual layout. Code has to be visible in order to be readable. There is a measure that we take stock of, how long it takes a new person to join, to get fully up to speed on the existing code base. Visual layout matters. If you don't have enough white space, if you have horizontal scroll, if you have too much nestedness, too much levels of nestedness, you're going to see it upon just glancing at the code, but it's important to remind people to say something, to make a note, to make it a point that this is not how we do things, and this is how we do things. Easier to read, the way it's visually laid out. Naming. Your code should tell a story. It should read in English or French or your language of choice. It should reflect the terminology of your business, the terminology of requirements. You should be able to have non-technical people review most languages. Functional is harder. Things like Java or Ruby should be easier. Anything very you read top to bottom or bottom to the top has to be readable by people outside of your team. And that's how you bring new team members up to speed or get help from people who are alone for a short period of time. Architecture. That's a tough one. A lot of the time, products start with a clear vision, what pieces there are and how we should fit together. And then this vision gets lost as people come in and start implementing their pieces and probably not reading documentation or learning about the original intent. It gets broken a lot. It gets broken typically unintentionally because we didn't know there was something to pay attention to. And it's next to impossible to spot with automatic checks. It will lead to bugs. Not probably. It will lead to bugs if what you're building is successful. If users will come back and ask for more, if you have to maintain software in a meaningful way, not just fix bugs. It takes a code review. It takes multiple people agreeing, yes, this is how things should be done. Yes, this is how things should connect. And then test coverage. Some people will say that everything you talk about as far as quality of your production code applies to quality of your tests. Maybe, maybe not, but there is such a thing as quality of your tests. First, they should exist. If you're not doing tests, you should do that as soon as you're doing code reviews, or maybe even sooner. But reviewers should be looking at your tests as you're showing code to them. We also have questions reviewer would be asking in a code review, and they are not secret. It's not an exam where you get questions you don't know answers to. We all know that code should be readable, it should be maintainable, and does it do what it appears to do? Everyone is reviewing everybody else's code. Well, not everybody, but each piece of code gets reviewed by someone who is a non-author. And these are the questions we'll be asking. This is what typically happens in code review that I say does not belong. You shouldn't have to explain your code. Your accountant should be able to read it and tell you this is what happens here, and they should be close to right. They probably won't be perfectly right, but they should be very close to right. Checks by automated tools. You picked the tools. They run. They take seconds and at worst minutes. They require no human involvement while we are running, and it should be good policy to fix all the warnings that you as a team has configured to show up, warnings and errors. Reasons why this code is allowed to be bad. If this code truly is allowed to be bad, it shouldn't be code reviewed. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, throw it away. It's not maintainable. If it's been reviewed, clearly someone thought it should be reasonably good code. So let's not argue about the reasons. And then there are arguments about preferences. Those take the majority of time scheduled for big code reviews. We always find ways to argue. This one very senior guy who always did code reviews for his big team of 12 people once a week. He would pick a victim and scream at them for an hour how you're not supposed to do a for loop here, you're supposed to do a while loop. Well, I don't know if that's important, and if we should put an automated check, I'm very sure that it wasn't worth the team's time, but the entire team's time to listen to him screaming to someone. And finally, if you think if you're doing code review, you don't need to do anything else, that's a little too optimistic. Yeah, code reviews could be great, but you still need QA, because not everything will be picked up by visual inspection. You still need automated tools, and you should want automated tools because they're many, many times cheaper. The most expensive resource is people time, not just by the money we spend hourly, we get paid hourly, but also we have limited attention span, limited capacity for processing complexity. So if you can outsource some complexity to automated tools, it's a big win. It won't get us all the way there, but it'll get us quite a bit. And then discussion on formatting tools or patterns. Don't get me wrong, these discussions should happen. They just shouldn't be part of a code review. You certainly don't want to do them every time you're reviewing a piece of code. They should happen either early in the project or as part of, or at certain intervals, or whenever you feel like such a discussion should happen. Don't argue about things that is formatting, invoking tools, or built-in patterns. If a pattern doesn't fit, that's one thing. If a pattern isn't quite implemented right, that's a problem. But should we put this in a pattern just because we feel like it? Because patterns look good on someone's resume? Or I implemented visitor, that sounds good. Don't have these discussions, it doesn't matter. And then there is a question. If my code is not perfect in a reviewer's opinion, should it be fixed before it can move forward or not? Yes? No? Folks are completely quiet. No. Well, it depends, right? It depends how not perfect it is. Obviously, bugs need to be fixed, right? That if requirements are missed, that needs to be remedied. Some style comments should be addressed and others not necessarily. There is a question of seniority. If this very senior guy is telling me to change something, do I have to do it right then? Every team builds a culture around these things. How much conformity do we want? If you brought something completely new, something that your team doesn't normally use, is it okay if it stays in the code, even though code reviewer pointed it out that it doesn't belong? It's a team discussion, not to be had in code review, but about code review. What it means to produce quality code. Where is the line? Because there is always going to be comments on, I think it would be done better this way. Well, there's usually more than a way to implement something, and because you thought of a different way than the original offer, it doesn't make it any better. Sometimes it will be better, sometimes it will be worse. I've seen both. Teams will synchronize on look and feel of the code and will learn about each other's coding styles and merge on their coding style. It's a big win. It helps if you have time to go back and fix those stylistical issues. You should definitely fix naming, but not everything is a requirement. So one thing that I find typically missing from code reviews are compliments. Code review is when a person is bringing in a result of their work. They don't get complimented enough. Thank you. You didn't just show up and attended meetings. You actually produced something that works. It should work by them. There has to be at least some good things in every piece of code presented for code review. Otherwise, that person wouldn't be working there or shouldn't be working there. And it's not a question for code review, it's a question for the team. If they're really that bad, don't have them on the team. If they're on the team, you picked him or her or them, or yeah, you should have a list of operative pronouns. So find good code, point it out, tell others, make it part of normal in your code base. We're obviously looking for bugs. We're always looking for bugs. They usually find them. Again, they're looking for bad code where there's too much complexity, there is bad visual layout, there is gotchas. Their code doesn't do what it appears to do, but does something else instead. Something where this developer hasn't made a mistake yet, but the person coming next probably will. Erratic code. It could be perfectly fine and it could be self-contained, but if anyone ever has to reopen that can of worms, it could take scary long time, even if it won't break the entire system or bring it to a crawl. It happens especially with legacy stuff. Oh, I'll just add this little thing here. Yeah, by the time you've done this a few hundred times, this little thing grew to huge levels of complexity, and by the time you're reviewing it now in 2018, you don't understand it and you can't expect anyone else to understand it, and it's really hard to bring up. And then there are illnesses: scalability, dependability, optimization, security. Do you do code reviews for those? These are great points for code review. They're also kind of specialized. I recommend separating them because code review for security needs to travel up and down the stack rather than address a little piece of code. Same with scalability. That should involve profiling and knowing what you're checking and making sure you are optimizing in the right spot. This is too much to crawl in 20 minutes 3 times a day on every new change. So do them, but don't expect all security reviews to happen on a nimble, agile schedule of regular code reviews. The reason we are doing this is to have a common vision for all people writing code that goes into your shared product code base. That's the point. So that we have good code, less of the bad stuff, and some time to deal with future growth. Scalability, security, all this good stuff. If your product is not used by anyone, nobody is going to be hacking it. So assume yourself to be successful and check, but set aside separate time for that. And here's a new idea, new since Fagan's time. Code review is not a meeting. It's definitely a communication, but it's not necessarily a meeting which frees people from synchronizing their schedule. It's a break in my work, therefore I'm going to go bug you to look at my code now. Well, you might be in the middle of thinking through a different complex problem. There are tools that track specifically code reviews. a lot of teams I know worked off pull requests or off commits. I like the last one the best because you want to merge early and then fix later. But pull requests also work, especially if you can do code reviews quickly and not build up debt. You have to prepare. Offer of a code does very little to specifically prepare for code review. We are writing the best code we can to solve the problem we set out to solve, usually addressing a story on the backlog. Reviewer has to, on the other hand, they have to get into somebody else's story. They have to learn the requirements. They have to know what the touch points of the code that they're reviewing are. There is a conversation. The reviewer will be passing notes to the person who wrote the code. The person who wrote the code might be passing notes back. Not the explanation what the code does, but maybe, I'm not sure about this. Do you have any suggestions? Is a perfectly legit intro to a code review. Sometimes I've seen people ask for multiple code reviews or code reviews from specific people on the team, more than one, more than normal number, because something is complicated or something needs to scale to a big degree and they want to have coverage. And then there is follow-up. Yes, you have to address comments that you get. No, you may not have to implement 100% of them, but you have to address them. You have to learn from them, and you have to work with the other person, having an opinion on your code. So, before you go into the code review, you have to have unit test coverage. You have to run code quality tools and address all the errors and warnings it brought you. So that the reviewer is not doing this again. We are not dealing with a single syllable variable names, so that we are not dealing with methods that span pages, so that we are not dealing with horizontal scroll. They shouldn't have to tell you these things. Those are mechanical. Outsource them to tools. Reviewer has to read the code and the tests, and hopefully there isn't that much to read. What's considered readable is specific to your team and your technical community. I can make some suggestions. There are industry best practices, but ultimately it's determined by the people you work with, by the people who have to deal with this stuff on an everyday basis. Every team has a common knowledge base. Some teams are higher level, some teams are lower level, but every product eventually gets shipped to maintenance development team, who are usually lower skilled. A former colleague of mine used to say, I write code with the thought that a person who will maintain my code will be a violent psychopath who knows where I live. So you better not anger that person who will come after you. More importantly, even if you're not leaving, it's just the project gets passed to another team. Do you want to retire on the project you're working on today? Probably not. Most of the people I ask this question to have never thought about it, but upon reflection, no, we want to move on. We want to get this done and do something else, something new and shiny that will get familiar eventually. So expected tenure is another consideration. How long do you expect to stay there? Do you expect to be there long enough to work out all the kinks? How good are your predictions? You may get shipped to something else. Your product might be good enough that it's going out now. That's how agile projects are. They're built enough. We don't need a full team to continue building on it. It's done. And then 3 years later, who can we get to fix things here and there? And then popular tools. That depends on your language and on your tooling. If you're working in a proper IDE, then small files and lots of them is probably fine. 20 years ago, we all programmed in VI. Having many files was much more of an issue because search is harder. Right now, we are in a very nice environment, and it's probably going to get better, not worse. So I assume better tools and lobby for better tools. They're worth it. Readability. Less is more. Less code together, plus nestedness, and what you see is what you get. Another word for this, no gotchas. If you have a lot of non-obvious things happening, that's a recipe for bugs. The product will be bogged down in issues continuously. The maintenance team will want to hurt you badly. Your product owner will want to hurt you eventually, or maybe the next product owner who is responsible for maintaining the code. So make sure your code looks good to the next generation. Poor readability. This is real code. It works. It's a rotating donut. It's beautiful. ASCII rotates if you run it in a browser. I wouldn't hire anyone who insists on writing this for work. For fun, great. But software development is a team sport. And the beauty of any work environment is it's relatively unpredictable who you'll end up having on your team. So don't do that. It's hard to read things when you haven't written them. I had this comment in this talk once. The guy from the back row said, "My code is perfectly readable. I can read it when I am writing it." Well, that gives us exactly zero information about how readable your code is. What if you took a long vacation, say 6 months sabbatical, and came back and had to deal with a problem urgently? How long will it take you to get back into swing of things? What if you had to deal with a family emergency and somebody else was brought in? How hard would it be for them to figure out the logic? If you have all this stuff, long ifs, double negatives, side effects, a long time, and they'll make errors in the process. Again, more ideas about what good code actually is. You'll have to decide tiny details for your team. But the last one is do not repeat yourself when it comes to code and to tests. Naming. Bad examples of bad names. Code quality is kind of a kitchen sink. You choose what you want to look for. You decide what's important for your team. The important point is code reflects understanding. The longer you spend on the project, well, not necessarily. The better you understand the project, the better your architecture will be. If you have new team members, they may need more hand-holding, understanding the unwritten stuff. And then there are technical details. I think that's it. Outcome of code review. You both learned something. The author learned something, the reviewer learned something. There are recommendations. Sometimes they are from the author, sometimes they are from the reviewer. And then there are recommendations in the style of try it out. I think that might work better, but I haven't spent enough time figuring it out. This works. And then the main part of follow-up, prepare for the next code review, because it is coming in a couple of hours. That's it. Challenge the advice. Do your own research. That's how we learn and grow. Reviewer can bring up some points that you never thought about. Let them. Don't fight them on it. It's okay to ask for clarification. They might know something you haven't encountered yet. And then code reviews are done in iterations. Small, short, multiple times a day while you still remember, and they'll help you remember. So we are back to what code reviews give us. Good code, shared understanding of our code, and improving, iterating on getting better. Thank you. And I'll leave you with this image. James? I'm out of time. There was no questions. I'm around. Do you have questions?
We can do one.
Can do one.
I see one back there.
I can, yeah. Do you find it's more effective to include, like in Scrum type planning, do you find it's more effective to include code review as part of the formal process, or is it something like, you know, you almost put it in your Jira, your project manager as a step along the way? Or is it something that kind of happens on the dev floor separate?
Great question. Should it be part of a formal software development process? And should you put it in Jira as a separate task? I don't think code review is a separate task. As a professionals, we want to deliver no lower than a certain level of quality. So code review should be there for everything, but it's not a separate task because that's what product owners want to save on. It should be part of your definition of done. It should be part of your normal process, but please don't put it in Jira. It tends to get cut there. All right, James, take it away.
Hello.